The talk that is about to take place is Bentley Pascoe with Beautiful Idiots, a journey with Rainbowfish. Bentley has been sponsored by Bob Mennel, Zenon Skomarovsky, and the Skylands Aquarium and Water Garden Group. So thank you to our sponsors. Fascinated by tropical fish since childhood, Bentley's family has been in the fish-keeping hobby since the 1950s. After rediscovering his love of aquariums in 2016, Bentley has completed Greater Seattle Aquarium Society's Master Aquatic Horticulturist 10 times. How many plants is that? Too many?
Hundreds.
Oh, God. All right, a lot. Having propagated over, 200 species of aquatic plants, I could have just read ahead, and flowering over 30 of those species, Bentley has taken his love of plants to his YouTube channel, providing tips and tricks on how to have long-term success with planted tanks. Beyond plants, Bentley is an avid rainbowfish enthusiast and has a personal mission to increase the number of people keeping rainbows in the hobby. So I think this talk is... You're bet on that?
It's on mission.
It's on mission? All right. Well, if everybody could welcome Bentley, we'll get him set up and we'll get this on the road.
Thank you, Callie. No problem. Okay, so wonderful intro, but I always start with a who is this guy? And I do this for a reason. I do not have any scientific degree. I, in fact, have no college degree. I'm not a prolific breeder of fish. If you were to look back in my history, whether it's through YouTube or through my club, it's not a lot of breeding. There's a lot of plants, but not a lot of breeding fish. What am I? I am just psychotically in love with a number of fish, specifically rainbow fish, but there are others I love too. We kind of mentioned a little bit. Fish keeping in my family goes all the way back to my great-grandmother. She used to breed angelfish in the 50s and 60s. Fish have been a part of my family. There are photos, and I could not get a digital copy, otherwise I would have kept it. There's a photo of me as a tiny baby being held by my uncle in front of a 125-gallon tank as a kid, staring up at the tank in wonder while my parents are laughing with my uncle at how dumb little baby Bentley is, right? So kind of give you some short preface. For those in the room, are there any of you who actually have no clue going to this who I am? I'm very curious, because I'd be flattered that you have that much faith. Yes. The fact that you have that much blind faith in a speaker at a convention to come in without knowing who I am, I appreciate you immensely.
As long as you have nice photos, I think everybody will be happy.
So as Callie said, my talk for you guys is called Beautiful Idiots. And this will make a lot of sense really quick if you've never kept rainbow fish, which is a journey with rainbow fish, specifically my journey. So our story begins, I kind of mentioned my childhood with fish. I've been into fish since I was a kid. Can we say that I was keeping fish as a kid? No, of course, my parents were doing that. But man, did I love going to fish stores, staring at tanks. And back when I was a young child, discus were the unattainable goal. In the 80s, I looked at discus like they were the most magical thing known to man. Go down up until I get into college. I'm rooming with my cousin, who's one of my best friends in the whole wide world. He works at a Petco as the aquatic specialist, despite the fact that he's actually a reptile specialist. Petco, what do you do, right? But we have one tank. It's a stupid 55-gallon bow front with a giant Jack Dempsey cichlid that is, as we well know, a murder machine and beats lots of stuff up. But before that, I kept lots of small schooling fish. Had a seam bust on the tank. We're college kids. We can't afford to replace this thing. We're now out of the hobby. That's early thousands. Fast forward 2016, so roughly 15 years later. I'm in my home. I've just been laid off of work. I'm staring at YouTube, and I find this beautiful video from a channel called The Green Machine about aquascaping. Specifically a video called Continuity. And I see beautiful fish in planted tanks, and I'm hooked. And the first thing in my mind is, I miss having fish tanks. So here is a picture of my first fish tank when I came back to the hobby. It's kind of up close. It's terrible. I know, that's purposeful. This is a Fluval Flex 15. I had ordered this thing off of Amazon, like you do nowadays. Totally didn't look into what my local fish stores are. But before it even arrived, I went and bought a different tank because I saw another video, the revelation. For those of you who are fish nerds and really love rainbow fish, you might recognize this tank. It is definitely not mine. I saw this fantastic video from the Aquarium Co-op interviewing this kooky guy named Gary Lang. And they were going around his fish room, and I saw all these beautiful fish. And then I went down a rabbit hole. I started looking up everything about Gary Lang known to man and these crazy weird fish that I've never seen in my life before, specifically this beautiful specimen right here, the Bosmani rainbow fish. And now I would call that enabling an addiction, which is to say I was hooked immediately. And at first I got myself this nice 135 gallon tank downstairs, hadn't even got my Flex to come in. It was still in the mail. Already had 135 gallon downstairs because when I get into a hobby, I do not just dip my toes in, I dive in so deep into the quicksand that I can't see anymore. This should tell you a lot about me. So needless to say, at first I was thinking, oh, small schoolers, zebradanios. We just heard about these in Kelly Foreman's presentation just before mine. Tetras. Oh, I could do some angelfish. Then I saw that video and well, that was game over. So this is my first rainbow tank. Now for you rainbow enthusiasts, you should immediately see a number of problems. And this is why I say you're gonna learn a lesson real fast. This thing, thought I was slick. This beautiful piece of spider wood over here, these giant chunks of wood, this little spike here, these plants that are so gingerly put in my substrate, this like weird division thing trying to be an aquascaper. I'm definitely not an aquascaper. All these big scalloped dragonstone rocks, man, they look so pretty, don't they? Well, here's the thing. Rainbow fish is idiocracy. This is a video of that same tank, and you can see some plants have changed. But I'll start this video, and I just want to see how many things you see in this tank that might be initial red flags. And maybe you don't know them, but I'll teach you in a minute. See this, and let's start talking. So we've got, there's a German blue ram. There's a questionable rainbow fish here that I got secondhand at a store. There's a group of terrified Kyathidanios hiding back here because of these big idiots flapping around. There's this big electric blue Acara here. There's probably some other mistakes in there that I can't see on camera quite yet. Then you get into moments like this. What the hell is that? This is the thing I said a lot when I first started keeping rainbow fish. And this will get us into our primary reason why earlier I said was idiocracy. See, rainbow fish, as I said earlier, they're dumb. They're beautiful, but they're idiots. And this is a common thing you will see in rainbow fish. Because rainbows, when they start courting, sparring, food's nearby, a light came on, you walked in the room, someone else walked in the room, the cat got on top of the tank, your dog vaguely went past, the mailman's outside the window 700 yards away. For whatever reason, these lovely geniuses will ram into everything known to man. And you will very frequently, if you've never kept them before, see this. Big white mark on the front of their lips. Don't worry, don't panic, because that's what I did the first time. I immediately went, oh God, what disease is in my tank? What medicine do I need? Probably before I even was sane about this, had bombarded a 125 gallon tank with God knows how much medicine and how much money I whipped out of pocket to find out that this is normal, they're just dumb. So, let's talk about some lessons that I learned when I first started keeping rainbow fish. And if you haven't kept rainbow fish, this will save you the pain, misery, and general panic that I went through. Gary Lang is famous for saying that rainbows bump and rainbows jump. Saw that big mark on that guy's lip? Rainbows run into everything. When they're doing something other than swimming steadily, they don't pay attention to anything. So if you have that big spiky wood like I did in my first rainbow fish tank, they will ram right into it constantly. Nice pieces of stone. They will ram right into it constantly. They'll bang up their mouths. They'll do all sorts of dumb injuries. You feed them, they're so excited. They'll splash water 15 feet across the room. They'll jump straight out of the tank if you don't have a lid in place or keep your water level slightly lower. Even if you do keep it lower, they're like little torpedo missiles, and they fly at ridiculous speeds at the smallest drop of a hat. So you could have a moment like I did, where I put food in a tank, forgot to put a lid down. I'm about to go out with my now wife, but girlfriend at the time. I'm going to go do some errands, and she's in there looking at the tank, and all of a sudden, and I just hear this panic scream from the other room. Honey, one of the rainbow fish is on the floor. What do I do? Pick it up and put it back in the tank. What? Pick it up and put it back. Hold on. Run, which, is kind of like an elephant slowly trampeding because I'm a big guy. But, run to the other room. Here's my parva flopping around on my carpet. Just close lid. I'm an idiot. So, lids are your friend. And in general, all those things that all of those aquascapers love, those big spiky bits of wood, big fancy rocks that are kind of sharp, try to avoid those because rainbows won't. They'll run right into them. They're dumb, but man, are they pretty. When you see little white things on the front of their face, or maybe you even see a little bit of scale damage, don't panic. They're dumb. They hit something. A small touch of salt is your best friend. You don't need to go finding like the nuclear warfare medications and start hurling them into your tank right away. 99% of the time, it's not actually a disease. They're just dumb and hurt themselves. They do this a lot. Welcome to Rainbowfish. Pay attention. So in that previous one, we saw a German blue ram. Those like 83 degree temperatures or so. Caethidanos, those prefer a little cooler temperature. Rainbowfish, those like to be about 74, 76. They can take a lot, but that's about perfect. Don't go mixing fish that want to be in 10 different temperatures. You will find yourself in some semblance of torture trying to keep one happy and the other miserable. Trust me, I know. I've made more than enough mistakes. Like I said, not a scientist, just some idiot on the internet who really, really loves these dumb idiot fish. And then finally, really pay attention. Also, rainbow fish, like I said, they're really boisterous when they go to eat. They love food. They have bottomless stomachs. They will beg you for food right after you just fed them. And they will do it again and again and again. Anybody who's kept rainbows is just doing this. You've had your rainbow fish. You fed them for the 6th time today, but they're still hungry. They've never had a meal in their entire life. They're so hungry. And because they're so boisterous, some of your shyer fish might struggle to get food around them. So when you are feeding rainbow fish, thankfully they're dumb. Put a little food on one side of the tank and trick them. Then the other side of the tank, throw the stuff that you need to go. Like you got corridoras, that's a kind of common thing to keep very often with many fish. They're great with rainbow fish very often. You get your sinking foods, sprinkle your flake over here, trick those stupid rainbows. Haha, idiots, throw it over here. They never even knew it existed. Your corys are fine. Your plecos, whatever. But try to avoid some of those much smaller fish, especially if they're super shy, because rainbows, they will eat everything in sight, whether or not it fits down their throat. They'll do that too. They'll literally choke themselves to death. That's how dumb this fish is. It's fantastic, but man, are they pretty. So we get past the initial, let's just say, growing pains of becoming a rainbow fish psycho. And what's more important is to say, a bowhead. This is a title that many of us rainbow fish enthusiasts love, bowheads. And I like to say this is becoming a snob, evolving into a bowhead. This started with my first successful spawn. I felt pretty good. Like I said, I'm not much of a fish breeder, so being able to breed some Bosemani rainbows felt pretty awesome. And you can kind of see, here they are a little smaller, and then the last little bits as they were growing out, these lovely 2 fish stapled together that probably shouldn't be 1 fish, but they are. That's rainbows. They're so colorful. In some ways that don't even make sense. But here's the thing. Those 2 pictures, those are 10 months of painful, slow growth. And this is where part of the the lesson of why I say I'm not a fish breeder comes into play. You probably don't breed rainbow fish for profit. If you're one of those people who really wants to make this something where your hobby pays for itself, rainbows are probably not it, because they grow at pace of turbo slow, and to get them to color up is usually at a bare minimum a 6-month endeavor. And often with many rainbow fish, you're talking at least a year, some species as long as 2 years to get true adult color out of them. But the good news is they'll live like 12 to 15 years if you treat them right. They can live a long time. Some different, we have exceptions of course, but so I got my first spawn. And then I found out my club was bringing in the much lauded man, the guy who got me into this hobby, Gary Lang. Whoa. Now we're getting crazy. Now, for you fish breeders, this is probably normal. These lovely labels, that they're like their own language. I would be curious if anyone wanted to take a stab at translating this label here. You see, if... Go. Melanitania goldii. We got that part.
Yeah. GL from Gary Lang.
Oh, GL Gary Lang. We figured that out. Hold on. What do we got here?
The date, collection date. That's the location.
Okay. So we've got a collection location, and we've got the generation from wild. I heard that in the back. And then finally,
Spawn date.
date hatched. First hatch. Right? There you go. Now we start speaking our own crazy languages. Now this one here, you can see a little bit before this happened. This was the test batch that I ordered from another well-known rainbow fish nerd named D. Brown. For those of you who are on Rainbow Fish Live, you probably know who D is. He's a wonderful person. But it's like, my hero's coming into town. I better make sure that that one mistake with Bosemani rainbows and a future mistake with goiter rainbows was actually like, legitimately, I know what I'm doing, before I go hog wild and pay a college fund to somebody for all sorts of rainbows. Now, when we're dealing with rainbows, we get this really fun behavior that I like to refer to as the dance, which is to say, I want to show you what rainbow fish courting looks like and teach you something that you might not know. So this is a video of some Chilatherina fasciatas from Ungulum. And you can see they have almost no color.
Could you thank you. Sorry. This slide is hard to see. Thank you.
I know, I'm large. I'm a door, not a window. But you can see, even when these fish are young, these fish are about 6 months old. They're almost no color to them, but yet very actively courting and trying to spawn. One of the beautiful parts about rainbow fish is that they'll spawn for a long time, nearly daily. And sometimes they'll take breaks, but they start way younger than we think. So here's another example of one thing that takes you from idiot, this time when I was keeping rainbow fish, to snob. All those fun labels, right? Here's my mixed rainbow tank. And here's my Bosemani that had spawned in the past. And you see the male doing his thing, big white stripe. And then you'll notice that this other idiot Australian rainbow just gets in there and mixes up the whole thing. And within an instant, in a mixed rainbow tank, one male from a totally different species will butt in, like the idiot he is, because, oh, she's doing the dance. Clearly it's for me. Totally not that other guy over there. Rainbows are dumb, and they will crossbreed. I like to say that they're the most open and forward-minding thinking fish in the hobby, because rainbows don't care whether you're a glossolepis or a melanitania. You could probably even be a pseudomcgill. They'll try and spawn with you because they're dumb and they love everybody, or at least that's the positive spin I like to put on it. So let's get into some lessons that I had from spawning bows based on mistakes. This, letting anything spawn in a mixed tank and thinking maybe, just maybe, you can catch it at just the right time. Don't do that. Don't. So this is a wonderful photo from Gunther Schmida. Unfortunately, the hobby recently lost that wonderful person, but some of the best photography of rainbows out there. This is the Chilatherina blaheri. Beautiful fish. Love this fish to death. And I'm going to talk about the easy way to spawn rainbows based on my mistakes. First off, good small foods. And the reason why we do this is that by having lots of food, especially in smaller bits, it kind of triggers a natural instinct in the fish to realize that, Well, if there's lots of food and it's prevalent and it's small, there's probably lots of food for my babies. High quality foods also going to be great. Things like your freshly hatched brine shrimp, frozen foods, basically anything other than Wardley flake. Any of your standard modern day food is pretty high quality. Just avoid like Wardley, but good foods is better. Water changes. Most of us probably live by a certain amount of water changes, but rainbows really love a good water change. So much so that you can practically force them to spawn outside of when they would normally spawn by just doing a water change. They're kind of psychotic. You give them food and a water change, it's basically putting on Barry White. You're right there on the let's get it on, Spawning mops. Most of us have probably used them for any egg scatterer. If you didn't know, rainbows are an egg scatterer. Kind of like the giant shotgun that could, because they pay attention to nothing. And in big tanks, if your colony is too many fish, very frequently, the rest of the rainbows that aren't currently doing the dance are following the two doing the dance because that's fresh caviar and it tastes delicious because they're too dumb to realize that those are our children and they're more of us. It's an okay thing to leave those alone. Remember, they're pretty, not smart. Water changes. If I mentioned that part yet, it's pretty good. Water changes are really helpful. But with your spawning mops and your water changes, one thing that you can do is certain rainbows like their spawning mops to be really toward the surface. Other rainbows actually like their spawning mops to be much lower. In general, there's kind of an easy rule. Your chalatherinas are most of your stream style rainbow fish. They will frequently get into the mop itself and spawn up high. Your melanitanias are your lake fishes. They tend to stay lower and be more on the outside of the mop. So if you're not seeing eggs, but you have chalatherinas, open the mop up. They're probably deep inside the mop. Any given time, a small group of rainbow fish, say like 2 males and 3 to 4 females, you can probably leave a mop in a tank for anywhere between a week to 10 days, possibly even 2 weeks. Pull the mop, put it somewhere else, or move the adults. It's pretty easy from there. You start getting to hatching within 14 to 21 days with most rainbow fish. Eggs, there's 2 methodologies. You can pick eggs. That's a meticulous process. For those of you who want the Zen experience of slowly walking through and picking your eggs one at a time, don't be afraid. They might be teeny tiny, but they're actually surprisingly durable. You can feel the tension in a good fertilized egg. So don't be afraid that you're going to squish it. You can really just sit there and pick, or do it the lazy method, and this is what I suggest. Either A, move the adults, or B, just pick up the whole mop and move it to whatever your raising tank is going to be. Much easier that way. I mentioned this earlier. They're going to start way younger than you think. 6 months, about an inch in size. Don't be surprised if they start spawning. When they're fairly young, and I'm sure Dan can attest to this, you can get some fairly young rainbows and huck a mop in there. You will find eggs. You might not find a lot to start because they're young, but they will spawn pretty early. So even if you've gotten some young juveniles from maybe one of the one folks in the vendor room or something like that, maybe it's your first time trying rainbow fish, don't be afraid to huck a spawning mop in with them and just wait a week and then pull that thing out and check. And if you notice that, if you get to watch them, you'll find out certain fish right away in the morning is when they spawn, some are in the afternoon. In general, it's usually your chalatherinas are more afternoon, your melanitanias are more morning, but it's not cut and dry, always guaranteed like that. But if you start figuring out their schedule, you can watch and see if they pick their own eggs, because again, they're dumb and those tasty caviar are just right there to be snacks. Even the ones that laid them. That is how dumb this fish is. But if you pay attention, you can notice if they are kind of picking at the eggs. You can just rip the mop out, put a fresh one in. Takes us, 15 minutes and $3 to make a mop. Not too bad to have a bunch lying around. Finally, did I mention water changes? These are seriously your best friend if you're trying to get rainbows to spawn, maybe even more so than your Corydoras, for those of you who are familiar with Corys. Fresh water is a rainbow's best friend. High water quality in general is really good for rainbows. And also this can be a really, really good tool to prevent some of the problems with rainbow fish eggs, namely fungus. I did mention fungus, and nothing in rainbows is simple. Even when you've gone crazy and you get one of these silly German breeding ring things that you can get from Swiss tropicals, and you've figured out your own special language of this fry right here that I got from Gary, that's an F2, it's It's a really popular thing. Oh, it's only in the ring. Don't forget that. It's not these ones down here, because you're trying to be tricky and maximize your tank space, because you've only got so many tanks and your ambition is much larger than your number of tanks. Because you're an idiot. We can always run into problems. Now, I got another video for you. I like video, obviously. I do YouTube, right? I'm one of those psychos, narcissists, whatever you might want to call it. I want to see what you guys see. Other than bad focus. Because that's understandable. Yeah. Oh, wait a minute, hold on. We're going to get some good focus in just a sec, I promise. Oh, we got it. The camera figured it out. Now I want you to pay attention to that floating plant that's there and the roots, the aerial roots. Now compare that to the size of those fry. Welcome to Rainbowfish for the first 3 weeks. They are excessively tiny, which means they're excessively fragile. Before they even hatch, it's actually surprisingly easy to get fungus on rainbowfish eggs. My great ambition when I bought vial after vial of beautiful rainbowfish eggs that, oh, there's 50 eggs, I'm going to have tons of these fish, only to find out that all but about 5 of them have fungus in a single day after I brought that vial home. So arming yourself with the right weapons is a really critical thing raising rainbows. And over time, if you raise enough generations in your own water, this becomes less of a problem. But if you're picking up kind of a new species for the first time, or maybe you want to get something that's really hard for you to find in your local fish shops or throughout your local clubs, and you're going to go outside, maybe you find a wonderful, wonderful retailer like Dan's Fish, who works with a lot of awesome breeders, and you can get some fairly rare rainbow fish pretty easy. Things like methylene blue are your best friend. And there's some kind of easy stuff. You can literally take a single specimen container with an airline going at almost nothing, barely any oxygen, and a single drop of methylene blue. Or, if you can't get methylene blue, because for some folks methylene blue is really hard to find, there is praziquantel, or Prazipro. You've probably seen that in a lot of your local fish stores. That actually has a lot of really good anti-fungusing in it, and literally 2 drops of that in a large specimen container is all you need to prevent fungusing, as long as you've got just a touch of movement. And then when you start seeing fry, just take it, move it to wherever your raising tank is, slowly release them, because again, the fry are pretty small, they'd be pretty fragile. I don't know why this error came up, but hold on.
What was it doing?
Just a OneDrive issue. Quit it.
It might make you click it.
I'm just going to try to ignore it. There you go. Sorry, tech issue, but good thing I work in tech. After hatching, here's the other fun part about rainbowfish. Not only are they tiny, they have no yolk sac, basically put. So if you've raised plecos, cories, you're used to yolk sacs. They can last maybe a day, 2 before you really have to feed them. Rainbowfish, no. Why would that be so easy? You basically need to feed them kind of right away. And I put that in quotation marks. It's not like the second they hatch, if there isn't food right there, they're going to die. But it is really a short, maybe 2 to 3 hour window that when they first hatch, because they don't have yolk sacs, you have to get them food. And because, as we saw in that video, they are tiny. You need very small food. This is usually anywhere between 5 and 50 microns in size. So examples would be like ceramicron as a powdered food. Golden Pearls has a 5 to 50 micron size. For you live food enthusiasts, vinegar eels, microworms, paramecium, infusoria if you're really good at culturing it. I'm not. I'm terrible at it, so I don't try. But vinegar eels and ceramicron are my personal favorites. That's usually a good food because it will sit up in the upper about inch of the water column. Baby rainbows, with very rare exceptions, basically never leave the top inch of the water for the first month of their life. And again, they're very small. So if your air is very turbulent, that turbulence can kill them. So as you saw in that video, you saw barely any air, barely any water movement with those babies. That's kind of your target for about the first 2 to 3 weeks. After that, you can turn your sponge filter or your matin filter, whatever you're going to use, up a little bit. But just keep in mind that after hatch, for the first couple weeks, they're super fragile. So you have to be kind of careful with your water movement. Feed often. Most rainbow fish psychos who are better breeders than me, which is basically any person that gets into rainbow fish, who actually tries to breed them, instead of just look at them and go, oh, they're so pretty. That's this dum-dum. You'll learn that feeding often is so critical to the point of where, I'll say this, the people who I know are the best at breeding rainbow fish feed their fry for the first 2 weeks 6 times a day. 6. Not a joke. Tiny amounts in volumes. Now, granted, if you can create green water, that's a continuous source of food, and you can get really lazy about it. It's pretty great. So for those of you who are really good at green water, not this guy, ignore what I just said. Just use green water. You'll be fine. But for those of you who are like me and are bad at those things and rely more on, say, something like a vinegar eel culture or your processed foods, at least 3 to 4 times a day would be my suggestion for the first 2 weeks. After that, you can dial it down to about 2 to 3 times a day. But seriously, multiple times a day, 1 time a day is not enough. You'll lose 95% of your babies feeding that little, easily, if not every single one. Very fragile first 2 to 3 weeks. Live foods, we talked about those. And then there's this final question. When does the color happen? Rainbow fish are known for their color. I'll give you a quick evolution of most baby rainbow fish. There are some exceptions to the rule. Month 1 still looks like a pencil streak. Month 2 starts to look like a baby fish. Month 3 starts to look kind of like a really, really small rainbow fish. They actually get the body shape. Month 6, if you're lucky, the first inclination of color comes in 2 out of all of your fry. Realistically, you're typically looking at, depending on the species, anywhere between 6 to 9 months before the initial color comes in. And like I said earlier, some adult species, a great example would be some of the Australian species like the running river rainbow. They don't get their full adult color for 2 years. But if you have that patience, if you are that crazy, is that process magical? Because when you get that first fry that starts to color up, it is like being a kid in a candy store, because you know the rest of them are coming. And the more color that comes in, the picture forms in your head of just how beautiful this process is, how magical it is. Unfortunately, with magic, there's always misery. I feel like I have to cover this for anyone. Most of you rainbow fish enthusiasts are going to know this, but there are kind of 3 things that are common problems with rainbows. Number 1, the devil incarnate, Mycobacterium, fish TB. Rainbow fish are incredibly susceptible to fish TB, to a point of where if you see it in a tank, most of your dedicated rainbow fish hobbyists will tell you, euthanize the entire tank, nuke the site from orbit. It is the only way to be sure. I cannot tell you some of the biggest rainbow fish legends in the hobby, when they see Myco, they euthanize the entire tank. They strip the entire tank down. They might as well throw the tank away, the level of bleach that you throw at that bad boy, to make sure that the potential of having Myco resurface in that tank with whatever the next set of fish going into it is none. Sadly, with rainbow fish, they are so susceptible to it that if one gets it, every one of them in the tank will get it and die. Their immune systems basically cannot resist fish TB, unlike a lot of our other kept fish. And there's kind of a theory that rainbows just haven't been in captivity long enough to develop over time the natural resistances that some of the other fish in the aquarium trade have. I'm not a scientist, so I won't claim that that's true. That's just what I've heard from people way smarter than me. Take that how you will. Nerve damage. It might be kind of hard to see. I didn't have any photos of my own, but you'll notice in this Praecox rainbow, the front is really pale. And a common thing that I've seen in a lot of turquoise rainbows is the back will turn almost black. Remember that part where we said rainbow fish are dumb and they ram into everything? Sometimes instead of that nice little scuff on their mouth that eventually heals, they'll actually cause permanent nerve damage to a portion of their body. And you will see weird discolorations like this. And unfortunately, very frequently, when that nerve damage occurs, those fish don't typically live very long thereafter. But the good news is, unlike this, which is a good sign of mycobacterium, these open sores on the side of the fish, and sometimes they just look like what would be a rash for you and I, but on a fish, that's myco. These lovely, lovely, terrifying signs that when we rainbow fish see them, we tend to cry in a corner and beg for mommy. This doesn't spread, but it will inevitably and usually relatively quickly lead to that fish passing away. But the good news is it's not one of the terrible diseases. They're just so dumb, they've literally caused permanent nerve damage. And the final thing I'll talk about, pictures are kind of hard for this, but rainbows can develop slime coat issues. And this is actually a really simple thing to fix. But if you ever see cloudy eyes in rainbows, or even some cloudiness in their slime coat that you don't see the kind of metallic sheen that they normally have, very frequently this is because their pH has swung really weirdly, and their slime coats are just super reactive to large pH changes. So if you're in an area like I am, where there's basically nothing in your water, and if you don't buffer your water, your carbonate hardness will crash and your pH will swing all over the place. It usually goes from 7.2 to like 6 overnight if you don't buffer it in any way, shape, or form. The Northwest is fun like that. You'll see these weird cloudy eyes, and you'll do like I did with some fish that I had in quarantine at one point and panic horribly thinking you've caused some other disease until you've seen this once or twice and then realize like, oh, simple test. Oh, my pH is out of whack because I'm an idiot and forgot some carbonate hardness in my tank. So if you do see cloudy eye things like that with rainbows, just know that usually that's an indicator of pH problems first and not necessarily other things. Although I'm sure the more scientifically minded Kelly could tell us more. But I'm going the easy mode here. Now, my last little part that I want to cover here is finding true joy in rainbow fish. And this is what has gotten me from basic rainbow fish enthusiast to true bowhead. There are huge benefits to keeping single species tanks. This particular example is the running river rainbow fish. So in my tank here, you'll see like I have Equus corridoras, I've got some Siamese algae eaters, I've got a few autosingulates, but the only rainbow in this tank is that fish. And I design tanks nowadays around the particular fish that I want to put in it for a couple of good reasons. You can find cool cohabitants, right? Like Equus corridoras. These guys swim mid-water. And what's really cool is they'll school with the rainbows all throughout the tank. And it will almost look like a group of neon tetras. It's so tight, but it's cories and rainbows mixed. Completely different sides of the world, but they cohabitate amazingly well. And because there's only one species of rainbow, the rainbow's behavior is different than when you have a mixed species tank. They're much more cohesive as a unit, and it actually creates this really cool symbiotic behavior with the other fish in the tank. Well, they'll all keep together because they treat it as a method of safety. And they know as long as they stay together, other than the random fat guy that comes in and throws food at them, they're safe and protected. So I talked about designing a tank. This is one of my other tanks I've most recently done with Chilatharina Upper Tor River. Lots of rainbow fish have not been scientifically described, so there's lots of catch location names, and you'll get used to this if you start keeping them. But I want you to look at this. Not the plants. Like, we've got a female here. Here's one male. Here's the dominant male. If you were to keep these mixed without a good mix of females in them, all of them would be this color. But you keep at least one male to one female, preferably slightly more females than males, and you get this. The color gets more intense, the behavior gets more natural. If you really want to enjoy rainbow fish to the level of psychosis that someone like me does, where despite having no degree, for some reason Scotty had the faith to bring me in here and babble about how much I love these idiot fish, you get to see that. That fish is about 9 months old, and that color is that deep. When you keep them single species, and especially if you design things with like a dark background, dark substrate, because it amplifies rainbowfish color, and some plants. Lots of green helps it pop, but sometimes even reds help intensify their colors. You get that. And when you get that, if I sat here, and I have an hour long that I sat recording these because I just stopped paying attention to recording my video because I was watching these fish too long in my fish room because I was seeing this color that was just swimming around like crazy. And because I had turned on the lights at a random time, they thought it was morning again, and they were instantly trying to court and spawn the females. And I just sat there watching because it is magic and it is blissful. It's one of the most beautiful parts about rainbow fish. Oh yeah, I did actually embed a video just because, why not give you a snippet of that thing, that reason why I lost an hour of my time. You can see there's one male there and there's one male that tucked back here that are in like full dominant color. And this is kind of the more expected color out of this fish. But if you keep them single species, and in particular because they're Chilatherina, you can see I've got pretty good flow here from a canister filter. I tried to design something slightly river-esque. You get this. This is a 40-gallon breeder. It's got a pretty simple, I put a way too fancy canister filter on it, but its flow is about the akin of a Fluval 407 or an Awaze 350, roughly in flow. So it's nothing too crazy. But you can see like these two over here sparring with each other, and then they run off and try to kick the other less important males off so they can court the females. This is something that I can sit and watch for hours because you start getting used to seeing different behaviors when you keep bigger groups of the same species. And it's kind of the same, like if you keep all neon tetras, you can mix neons and black neons and cardinals together, they'll shoal together. But there's a big difference between that mixed group and just all cardinal tetras, right? Or you could keep emperor tetras and a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and yeah, they'll kind of all school together, but when you have a much larger group of all, say, rummy nose tetras, you see that big, tight schooling behavior, right? It's super prevalent in rainbow fish. And a lot of them have very different behavior, species to species, because they come from all these different environments and they're so biodiverse on this really small piece of land in the grand scheme of things that they have entirely different behaviors, not just colors. You can also do it like the simple way. You don't have to go quite as crazy. Here's some really young Chilatherina blaheri, basically just some val and a sponge. Super simple. But you can notice like the density of the fish. I put a little power head in here just to give them some flow that I turn on for a few hours a day. You can see the difference in their behavior where they try constantly to swim into that flow. Because again, the Chilatherinas are a stream fish. When you give them that stream style water flow, they sit in these big groups. And you can see like a random Mickey Mouse platy in there and some other stuff, leftovers from other tanks. They don't really discriminate. Rainbows kind of love everything. But you can get all these like interesting behaviors out of rainbow fish with some really, really simple things. You don't have to go grandiose and do like some giant fallen tree in a river with a $8 billion canister filter or sump. You can do things really, really simply and still get this amazing, incredible behavior out of these fish. And when you keep them single species, they do this significantly more than when you do mixed species tanks. On any of us rainbow fish enthusiasts, we probably have a label on every tank telling us exactly the catch location, species, everything, because like I said, many of these are undocumented, so that's the best way we can document them. I want to talk about some lessons learned from my now about 5 years of keeping rainbow fish. For really good food, or really good color, good food, dark substrate. If you're a fan of white sand, I regret to inform you that you're going to see washed out color a lot. Rainbows really do phenomenally well when you give them a darker background and dark substrate. They intensify their color naturally so much more. Plants. We talked about how I'm a plant enthusiast, so it kind of makes sense that I keep rainbow fish because this is a fish that even more so in a good planted tank starts expressing their color even more intensely. Also, certain species of rainbows that are slightly less dumb than the rest, if you have enough plant density, their fry can actually survive with the adults in the colony. And once they hit a certain size, they get left alone. But young fry, like those small ones that we saw in a video earlier, if there's no cover for them to hide in, they'll get predated on instantly because rainbows just think it's like, oh, it's a bug, instead of that's one of my children. They are that dumb. But, look how pretty this fish is. Do you really blame it for being dumb? Look how pretty it is. Ratio male to female, I kind of mentioned this earlier. In general, I do my best to keep 2 females for every male. Do you need to go that extreme? No. We probably want those super colorful males more than we want those not as colorful, slightly dull females. But what I have noticed is by keeping typically something around the ways of at least 2 males per 3 females, the males don't all chase lower numbers of females so much that it stresses their immune systems and they start having disease issues, or more importantly, just tiring out from running away from these dumb boys all the time, to the point of where they actually die incredibly fast if they're outnumbered by males. So if you are trying to avoid females because you want the super colorful ones, just keep an all male tank. That's okay. You probably won't have like crazy intense color on every fish, but you will have 1 or 2 dominant males in that tank that will show pretty close, like how I showed that earlier with the Chilatherina upper Tor rivers. You'll get that pretty deep color on 1 or 2 males, but for the most part, they'll show you good color, just not holy color, right? That kind of stuff that makes your jaw drop. Usually you need females to get that most intense, deep coloration because that's purely there for courting measures. Swim space. This is the one problem for most rainbow fish keepers. They do not like small tanks. Rainbows really need a lot of room to swim. I would typically say that outside of a few very, very tiny rainbow fish species like the Melanitania pygmaea, basically the minimum tank size is about a 40-gallon breeder. Most of us, like true rainbow fish psychos, will typically say you want a 4-foot tank or larger because they need a lot of that left to right swim space. But I have found in my experience, with exception of some of the biggest rainbows that are out there, I keep more of the smaller ones. Well, smaller big boys. Not the pseudomogills, those are the smalls, but you know what I mean. If you have enough room in your footprint overall, so an example, you can do a 40-gallon breeder with a bunch of crypts and stuff that leaves your upper water relatively open, okay. Just some stuff like Val in the background, but like the whole front 2/3 of your tank is basically completely open, that's good footprint overall to give enough room to give them swim space. They're very active fish. I mean, we saw several of these videos. They're constantly moving, going all over the place, especially when the males are courting or sparring. They fly all over the place very, very fast. So if we don't give them enough swim space, 1, they're going to bash into everything because they'll just go at turbo speed and not realize they can't slow down in time. And 2, you will be restricting yourself to basically keeping like 3 rainbow fish. And they're a schooler. They really want to be in numbers like 6 to 8 typically, if not more, if you can do so. Finally, the biggest lesson in all of aquatics, if you were to ask me a question, be patient. They take a long time to color up. They take a long time to hatch, 14 to 21 days. They take a long time to master, to be honest. I'm still trying to get good at just breeding these fish, not to mention keeping them in better ways and figuring out the little nuances of each species of the ones I keep. But trust me, if you're patient, you get this out of all of them. And you learn some more interesting things like certain species of rainbow fish, the female has just as much color as the male. You can learn by looking at just this dorsal fin with no color whatsoever, whether or not it's a male or a female. These are little things that time and patience will teach you with rainbow fish. And when you get there, trust me, you will be as addicted to these fish as I am. These guys probably cost me more than any drug habit ever would, and I am quite content to keep enabling this addiction. Lastly, don't forget, they're pretty, but they're dumb. So when you do see an occasional scuffed mouth, a little scuff on the side of the scales, don't freak out. Observe for a few days, maybe add a little bit of salt if you don't have naturally hard water. For those of you who live out this way and your water is liquid rock, don't worry, they like that water. Don't stress, you probably don't need the salt. Just give them a little time, they'll heal up. But if it persists for too long, or it's a giant red open sore, that's when you can panic. Questions?
I got 2 questions.
Yeah.
If I run a UV light on my Rainbowfish tank, does
Mhm.
that help with the mycobacterium problem?
Okay, so I'll repeat this just for my own recording, but question number 1 is UV light for trying to help with myco. The problem with rainbowfish is you might be able to stop potentially like myco in the first place, but if you were ever to get a fish that had been exposed to myco brought into the water system before it came into that water system, it is inherently in its body and there's no getting rid of it. Rainbowfish are just unfortunately so susceptible to it, at least to the knowledge that I have seen thus far from people far more scientifically minded than I am. I'm just some dumb idiot on the internet. But no, it's, unfortunately, like there's basically no getting rid of or curing myco, especially when it comes to rainbows. They're just way too susceptible to it. If they've been exposed to it once, it is likely they will die from it eventually.
So the UV light won't help.
Typically, no. But is it a reasonable countermeasure to try and make sure that you're less likely to see it? Yes. It's a reasonable countermeasure.
Second question, can
Yeah.
we take you home with us?
Hey now, you can, it's on YouTube.
I can live in your living room through YouTube, and I mean everything is available for a price. I've never had anyone ask me if they could take me home, so I'm very flattered. I think my wife would object, but I appreciate it.
Well, she has to come with Joan, thank you for burning that image in our mind.
Yeah, I got a question about plants.
Yeah.
Are there any particular plants that you should stay away from? Like, I noticed you're saying like the Java fern or something like that, or African fern. Is there anything that you should stay away from?
Sure. So for you people right there through the camera, are there any plants that you should stay away from with rainbowfish? In general, what I would say is the one category of plants I have found problematic, and only because rainbowfish are the way rainbowfish are, any of your finer root carpeting plants, like your glossostigmas, Japan clover, Monte Carlo, any of those things that have really small root structures that don't anchor themselves very thoroughly, when you have them in a tank, rainbows will think that that's an awesome place to spawn on top of. And I've had everything from like Blixa japonica to glossostigma to some of your smaller crypts like parva. They're so active in how they wiggle and do the dance, they'll uproot everything. But other than that, there's no plants that are, at least to my experience thus far, are a negative, unless there's something that is so pervasive a grower. The one that I can think of right now is like Pogostemon stellatus octopus, that will just take over all of their swim space if you're not really diligent about trimming it back. I tend to use a lot of like crypts, Java fern, Cypress helferi is another really great plant because it kind of acts as a natural spawning mop. Anything that leaves some reasonable swim space, whether that's up above or even below. So like you'll notice I've had a lot of nymphaeas in tanks. They do great with nymphaeas because they can swim under them and they're not quite violent enough in their movements to actually break the nymphaea. They'll just kind of swim around and under them. That actually works pretty well. But yeah, very rarely is there something that's kind of this is a no-go. You can kind of do almost anything with rainbows.
Like a floating plant, you could like a hornwort or something.
Oh yeah. Floating plants are great. Floating plants are absolutely great as long as you don't let them sink too deep into the water system. You know, if you're keeping it pretty thin and you're thinning it out regularly, perfect. I used to do a lot of like water wisteria because I'd use the root systems as basically live spawning mops. And then I would collect a few eggs and get them to some of my friends that were much better at raising baby rainbows than I was when I was working way too much to actually raise them correctly.
So you have root floaters
Yeah. All great. Floaters, pretty much any floater is great.
Okay, kind of playing off of what he said. I've got some buddies who swear when I'm thinking of Picta, when they get big enough,
Yeah.
will eradicate duckweed out of your tank, which to me is a plus. But have you had any experience with that?
So the question for you people again is fish like Melanitania, Picta especially, but the rainbows that get quite a bit larger, some of them are good at eating duckweed. My personal experience, I avoid duckweed like the plague. So when I've had duckweed, it's typically been in raising tanks where I've had smaller fish because I actually use it to limit the amount of water movement from some of my sponges, but I can push slightly more air. It's like the plant ghetto trick on how to like limit the amount of movement at the top of your water is using plants to diffuse it, right? But I've never had duckweed in a tank with full-size Picta. I do have full-size Picta, so now I'm really curious, but I'm also deathly paranoid that I will then have a unstoppable menace in that tank for eternity. So my curiosity might actually beat out my sanity, though, so we'll find out.
I need to put 2 years into raising a fish and it'll actually eat the duckweed.
I mean, I was going to say a $1.50 Shabunkin goldfish at about that big will become about that big by the time it's done. Anyone else?
You should ask Stephen Phillips of Stephen P. 2003 because he has 2-year-old Picta, and he occasionally gets duckweed. I never get duckweed, so I can't answer this for you.
Kelly's too blessed to get duckweed.
It's the one plant I can't grow.
Any other questions? Go ahead.
Are rainbow fish smart enough to know what time of day it is? Like, I'm keeping my fish in a garage and I work the night shift. So when the lights come on and off, do they know that the moon is out? Are they smart enough to know that?
Are rainbow fish smart enough to know time of day, regardless of when we turn our lights on? Let me answer that with experience from both myself and my personal hero, Gary Lang. Nope. They're dumb. I don't know if I've expressed this enough. So I have one tank where the lights go off at about 6 p.m. every day. But typically during the summer, there's way too much glare in my fish room because I get a lot of natural sunlight that comes in, so I have to wait till night to film. So I have to turn my lights back on so that you can actually see the fish. That video that I showed you earlier, the Upper Tor River, that was shot at 10 p.m. I had turned the lights on 10 minutes beforehand. And they all of a sudden went, oh, lights are on, it's morning. You can, if you limit the exposure to ambient light, trick them into thinking that daytime starts whenever you want. You can play God with these fish very easily. They are that level of dumb. But man, are they pretty. Yeah, no, it's actually kind of cool because if you work a weird schedule and you want to like light your fish room or your tanks around your work schedule, they'll think it's morning whenever the lights tell them it's morning. So you can easily trick them into thinking like, oh, it is morning time. Here is my best color now. It's kind of wild that they're that dumb. Go ahead.
Yeah, just to reiterate on what you were talking about with regards to them being not that bright. I always think of them as supermodels because the way they swim around the tank, it's like, I'm beautiful, everyone look at me, get out of my way. You know, it's like, but they're not aggressive.
Yeah.
Which is why I like them. That's why I've never gotten into cichlids, even though I know people love cichlids, but I don't want to get home fighting with customers and having to go home and fight with my fish, you know, or break up fights, you know what I mean? So they're awesome for that. And I had a pair of Australians that I was in a 29 gallon, which I now realize was really too small. And I had wood in there and I got plants and all kinds of junk. And it took 2 years for the male to get fully colored.
Yep.
And he was just so stunning. He was the most gorgeous thing you could see. And I'm sitting there looking at him and I'm like, you're just so beautiful. I love you. You know, it's like, you know, like talking to him, like, you know, like he can understand me. And then I go to work and the next day I come home from work and he had gotten trapped in the wood and he could have backed out, But that didn't occur to him. he kept trying to go forward, and he tore all his scales off on one side, and he died 3 days later.
Yeah.
And it was just like, I was just devastated, because I'm like, why didn't you just back up? You know, because I mean, that's all he had to do, but they're not that smart.
I think referring to them as the supermodels is really, really effective.
Yeah.
And I would almost take it to the extra level of be like, if you've ever seen the movie Zoolander, it's basically like the picture of how they portray models in that movie, where they are that level of, is a brain actually functioning in your head level dumb, you know, but are they pretty?
Yeah.
They're just, I mean, Gary Lang is kind of famous for referring to them as the dumb blondes of the fish world. I think supermodels might be the better one. I do like that. It sounds fancier. It makes them sound even prettier than they really are. Any other questions?
I don't not so much a question, but on the subject of the bacterium
Mm-hmm.
I contracted it, and I wasn't even a fish keeper at that point.
Oh, wow.
And I have no idea, to this day, I have no idea how it happened to me. Has anybody in the room ever contracted it besides me?
So basically, has anyone contracted myco, whether interacting with fish or not? Because you can actually, mycobacterium, one thing I should note, it is possible for us omnipotent humans to contract mycobacterium from our fish tanks, which is why keeping rainbow fish is its own special gambit, because they're so susceptible to it that it's surprisingly common to hear, like, even some of our best rainbow fish keepers to be like, yeah, I had to nuke that entire tank. I had a myco outbreak. So there are a number of rainbow fish people who will use gloves regularly when they work in their tanks, especially if you're in any profession where you tend to damage your hands a lot. Or, you know, you just have bad coordination, and anytime you work around the house, you're inherently going to hurt yourself.
Very
Gloves are your friend.
A very small cut on my middle finger, and that's all it took.
Yeah.
And it's just slow growing, but this became another legitimate cancer scare. I will never fully recover from the damage that this did to me. And I wasn't even a fish keeper, but yet I still became a fish keeper, but I'm very, very cautious with every single little thing I do.
Okay, well, for just you, Oinky, I would suggest, and for those that don't know, nickname, as much as I hate to say this, maybe avoid rainbows. Because unfortunately, myco is really prevalent in rainbows. One thing, when you start getting like really deep in the rabbit hole, or Kelly, you start finding sources who are really, really militant, might be the most accurate word, about preventing myco in their tanks, because it's just because rainbows are so weak to it, it's such a terrifying thing if it ever comes into one of your tanks. And because you just basically know you have to write that entire tank off. I'm a big softie. I have what I call my retirement tank, and I know that rainbows in there have myco, but I refuse to let them be euthanized. I want them to just live out their life. So I have this tank that is basically, I know it has myco. I've just let everything run its natural course until they're gone, because I am such a softie at heart that I can't, even with clove oil in the most humane ways possible, I can't do it. It's just the way that I am as a human being.
Can you transmit it to the eggs?
So, okay, that's actually a great question with myco.
When they laid eggs, they fertilized them, and you got fry. Well, the fry had it.
There are a number of rainbow fish keepers that I know who have kept eggs, but they will strip them away from the mop and get rid of the mop. Mm-hmm. It basically just gets burn piled, and try to hatch the eggs to hope they can keep some of the really, really hard or on the verge of extinction. An example would be something like Glossolepis maculosus. There's only 3 people in the country that have that fish. All of Germany, all the rainbow fish fans in Germany lost them, from our understanding, and they're extinct in the wild. So there's, to our knowledge, maybe 5 people in the world that have this fish, and it's beautiful. In an event like that, I would not be surprised if people were trying to get mops of eggs, strip the eggs away from the mop, raise up young in hope that they can avoid myco in safe environments before they were to euthanize those fish. Just because there's so few of them left, and we're trying desperately to keep them alive and kind of repopulate them amongst most of us enthusiasts.
Have you heard of any success with that?
Yeah, so right now, Lucas Bretz is one of the main people that has maculosis. He got some to Marcel W. For those who know Roseline 17, if you're an Aquabid fan, he also works with Dan. Dan carries a number of his fish. He recently got maculosis, and he's like, guy's probably the best rainbow fish breeder as far as quantity is concerned in the United States. That guy can pump out rainbows like it's nobody's business. I'm sure he's got some secret sauce that he's got going on that he's figured out. There's that too. I mean, he's the true scientist level rainbow fish nerd, but we have him in a few hands. It's just, it got down to where the only person that we knew of in the United States who still had them was Lucas. And he was having trouble getting fry out of them. Gary used to have them, couldn't get fry, and then had an outbreak in that tank. And before he could get fry, I'll get to you in a sec, Paul. Yeah. He had to euthanize him because it was just too much risk. And that's so for those emergency cases, certain people will do that. But if it's something that's more prolific in the hobby, usually there's kind of a cover your butt person somewhere in the hobby that has it, and you can just start fresh from scratch. But yeah, there are some rare cases where that would be the measure they take. Go ahead.
What's your definition of
Nuclear?
nuclear? Are you taking industrial strength bleach and throwing it in the tank, or are you emptying the tank and letting it dry for 3 years?
So it depends on the person. Me personally, I almost always buy all of my tanks on the Petco $1 per gallon, 50% off sales. If it was a small tank for raising, like a 10 or 20, I'd literally huck that thing in the trash. I can replace a tank for $10 or $20. We talk a 40 breeder, we're bringing out the hardcore bleach. We might even go a little more hardcore with some more commercial grade chemicals that take lots and lots of rinsing and a number of other things to get the tank back to a safe state. But for the most part, most of the people that are on that level, it's just a really heavy bleaching, drying the tank out and letting it completely dry for several weeks before it ever touches water again. We take a pretty aggressive stance. Myco is literally the devil as far as any rainbow fish keeper is concerned.
I have a question.
Yeah.
You said about the generations away from the wild.
Mm-hmm.
So, in my understanding that the wild fish are more susceptible to myco, or like generations down the line, the fish has developed some immunity or some.
Yeah. So often we try to keep most of the rainbow fish keepers pay attention to the first probably like F1 through 3. Yeah. After that, only a few are going to keep track after that. It's more to say, like, if they're that fresh to a wild collection, because wild collections are few and far between, just because there's only so much of Papua you can get to unless you have the right connections. It's a little easier with some of the Australian rainbows, but with the Papuan rainbows, especially West Papua, if you don't know the right people out there, you literally have to go and, like, this is where a Gary Lang talk is super informative, and I'm not a wild collector at all. Like, I'm not taking my butt to Indonesia to go pick these things. Like, look at me. Do I look like I'm built for that? No. I just love these things direly. But we keep track of them for a while just because it helps us know, like, how close to wild they are. Honestly, we probably haven't gotten deep enough in generations, even in the fish that have been in Florida farms for a decade plus at this point, to actually build up any level of resistance in rainbow fish to mycobacterium. They're just, unlike, our tetras and angelfish, things that have been in the hobby for 50, 70, 100 years. Really, rainbow fish haven't started kind of briefly in the 80s. Yeah, they've been discovered before that, but in captivity, they just haven't had enough time and exposure and mass breeding to really build up that level of resistance. But for those of us who are super crazy, when you get like an F1 or an F2, it's fun to keep track. Like the Running River rainbows that I showed you, they're F1. And they're kind of their own special story. And that's why I keep them. They're probably, I've lovingly referred to them as like the crown jewel of my fish room, because their story is something that's incredible. And if you would like to know that, it's on my YouTube channel. Shameless plug. And you can literally just look up my name because I'm not original when it comes to YouTube. So, yeah. Go ahead.
Speaking of shameless plug, if you really, really like rainbows, ANGFA, which is the Australian Living Fish Association, they put out a poster with about 48 of Dr. Schmidt's photos on it, a beautiful poster which I have up in my room. And you can order it from them, and it's a wonderful demo. There's at least 50 or 55 species on that poster.
Yep.
It's a wonderful addition to anybody's fish room, so you can order it from them.
Yeah, so shout out to ANGFA for their Gunther Schmida. Also, if you don't have to search terribly hard if you look up Gunther Schmida and look up his picture books. You can find that there is a publisher that still will ship to the United States from Australia some of his picture books that he's done of various rainbow fishes. Every one of the pictures is like this. Yeah. Every one is this super high quality, beautiful. You get some of like what I like to call the derp face rainbows where they're pointed at you with their mouth wide open. Like, it's kind of great. They're so dumb that even when they try to look fierce, they look like idiots. It's fantastic. But yeah, shameless plug for Gunther Schmida. It is a shame we lost the man, but his photography will live forever. I have 2 of his books, and I have the same poster you're talking about. And it is gorgeous in all its glory. What else?
I just want to really thank you again for bringing that up, because so many people have no idea what this even is. And I would actually encourage everybody to find out as much information about this and how devastating this can be on the human body.
For Myco, yeah.
And how hard it is to detect, and the medications that you have to go on. I've had surgery 5 times because of this issue. And it will never fully go away. But for everybody else, please, don't panic about it. But this can be a serious issue for all of us.
Yeah, Myco can be quite scary if we as humans contract it. Thankfully, the human body's a lot better at dealing with it, but it can be nigh impossible to get rid of too. Yeah. Just thank you, everybody, for coming in tonight.